Welcome to the O Club Podcast with your host, Erickson Sandoval. This podcast provides networking, education, and mentoring opportunities for all active duty, reserve, and veterans currently serving or have served as officers in the United States military, who also engage in various forms of investing, small business, real estate, and stocks. All right, everyone, welcome back to the O Club, a military officer investing podcast, and I am your host, Erickson Sandoval. And today I have with me my guest, Daniel Huffman. So, Daniel, I'm going to go ahead and pass it to you so you can, tell us your story and give us your background.
Yeah, thanks, Erickson. I just want to say, too, it's good to be here. I've benefited so much from podcasts and blogs like this one, so I really appreciate the opportunity to hopefully give back. So I'm currently a reservist in the U.S. Army. I'm a physical therapist, which is a 65 Bravo for those who know that. But I'm at about the 12 and a half, 13-year mark. And so I ended up pulling a switch from active duty to reserves at my 11th year. So I kind of hit that point where it was time to decide. And so before that, I'd always been into finance, personal finance, investing, and just kind of learning as much as I could. And I grew up in a family where things were always kind of tight. And so this was not knowledge that I had. But the more I learned, and then the more I had jobs, and the more I, just kept learning about investing, I just really became passionate about it. So I became that guy that was leading, personal finance, or we call it financial literacy courses, over lunchtime or at the end of the day through the FRG, or the family readiness groups and everything on post. And I just became so passionate about it. And then in around 2016, I found the financial independence community. And that really started to challenge a lot of my thoughts and my preconceived notions on how long I would work and, what work looked like really. And so around 2015, I found that. And then we'll fast forward to like 2018, I had started a blog on personal finance and investing. And I was just having a great time researching stuff. And so I decided to start a certified financial planner program. I ended up getting deployed like right at the end of my very first class of that. And it was when my wife was also pregnant and we were living in Germany. And so it was just really not a great time to keep doing that. But over the course of the deployment, it was supposed to be a 10-month deployment, but I'd gotten permission to break it in half from my leadership. Had another physical therapist that wanted to deploy. And so I was hoping that that'd be pretty straightforward so I could make it home in time for the birth of my son. But when I submitted my paperwork to split the deployment, it got rejected. And the only reasoning from this colonel was physical therapists don't split deployments, doctors do. And I was like, okay, this is awesome. I literally kind of volunteered for this. I was going to get voluntold anyway, but I kind of volunteered to come here on 24 days notice to, cover you and cover all of like TAC East and Afghanistan. And so it really just hit me hard. And then later that week, I was flying to this little outpost near Eastern Afghanistan, Pakistan border. And I was reading the book, The Simple Path to Wealth. And it just hit me how J.L. Collins, the author of that book, he kept talking about how multiple times throughout his career, he had taken sabbaticals from like a year to 3 years long, and how it never really hurt his career. He had been doing things right, saving up money. So they had a nice long runway that they could do that stuff. And it just hit me. I was like, why not? We were kind of accidental. I won't say totally accidentally financially independent, but we had always had a high savings rate. We were dual income, no kids for a number of years. And so just invested aggressively because that's what I knew and I loved. And so when I started to see that mindset around, why not take a sabbatical? Why not potentially change careers? It really just planted that seed. And then long story short, I was able to talk to a different guy. He made some things happen. I made it home in time for the birth of my son. But I just kind of swore like, I never want to be in that position again where I feel powerless and I have to hope that someone else is willing to speak up for me. And then COVID happened. And so when COVID happened, all of a sudden I was spending more time at home. And it was just amazing being home with my family. And I was able to work on my blog more, which was never a successful blog, I'll add. But I had a ton of fun and I learned a lot of stuff. And the people that would reach out to me about it, it was really rewarding to see them be excited about what they were learning. And so it just kind of reignited that passion. Like, man, I should probably switch careers. And so during COVID, it just kind of became this thing I couldn't deny anymore. And I was like, I have to get out. So a lot of people thought I was crazy, but I promoted to major in February and was out in September, switched over to the reserves. And, I still want to lock in my 20 years, still get the pension, still keep cheap healthcare, all that good stuff. But I spent the past 18 months going through the certified financial planner coursework, taking the exam, took the Series 65 exam. And then finally in February, I was able to launch my independent financial planning firm. So I absolutely love it. But what I love about the financial independence space is that it gave me a new framework from which to view the world through, and just that freedom and that flexibility that we don't have to be stuck to the traditional work. I don't know what to call it even, but like the work model that so many people are in. And so now that I've tasted that freedom, there's no way I can go back. So I'm stuck now doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I just love like the progressive approach that your life took. You saw like your family background in terms of finances, and that kind of fueled you to reach out and get more knowledge. And you started reading books and even started a blog. And then from there, you started your financial certified planner program. And all that, you mentioned the Simple Path to Wealth book. Would you say that culmination of all these events finally made that click, or did that book really speak to you that, at that point, that's when you realize, hey, I need a shift?
I think it was some of both. When I first found the financial independence space, we'll go ahead and call it the FIRE community, right? I was all against the RE part, the retire early. I was just like, I don't think that's right. I was envisioning my grandpa and grandma who retired and got pensions, sat down, started watching the news, and just became angry old people who got sick, right? And so that was what I had in my mind. But it was over those years. And then, yeah, when I was reading J.L. Collins' book, it just hit me like, that doesn't have to be what retirement is. And so I honestly don't view myself as retired now. I just feel like I'm free to make the impact in the way that I want to make the impact on my own timeline and my own schedule. And so it was just, yeah, life stress from being deployed and not knowing if I'd make it home for my son's birth, and then COVID and seeing how good it was to be home. And it's just, and then along the way, everything I was learning about real estate and investing at the time, I was like, man, I need to be doing this more. And I think I could teach people how to do this more. And so one of my passions is always teaching. I always thought I'd get my PhD through the Army and teach. But now I'm like, man, this is a different route, but I'm still going to end up teaching. And so I love it. Very passionate about that.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thanks for sharing that. And, my next question is, what prompted you to start the blog? Because not a lot of people go, hey, let me start a blog.
Yeah. So two things. One, I was having a conversation with one of my junior enlisted soldiers at work, and I was explaining some stuff to him about the TSP. And he was like, why don't they just teach us this, like in basic? Or why don't people just tell us this? And I was like, I don't know. That's a good question. I was like, I should do that. So that was like the first thing. I was like, I'm going to start this blog. And then my second thing was, oh, it's going to be the most popular blog in the world. It'll get big. This will be my financial independence, but no, I'm way too technical of a writer. So when I read the popular blogs, they drive me nuts because they're not technical enough. And then when people read mine, they're like, you read like a research paper. And so I'm like, okay, that's not going to go big. So yeah, but it was awesome. It was a kind of personal finance investing. And what my real passion in investing is, as far as stocks goes, is called factor investing. And so factor investing is fascinating. And there's a ton of academic research out there on it. And I think because I have my master's and my doctorate, I'm able to read through the research and then hopefully explain it in a way that's simple and understandable and actionable for people to take those steps. And so that's what I love the most with my blog. Those were the most rewarding experiences, was when people got that and appreciated it.
Yeah, that's amazing. And like with anything, there's always a certain avatar or people that will gravitate towards what you're presenting. So you being technical may not reach the masses because, as you said, a lot of those blogs, they just kind of make a story out of it and don't really get to the meat and potatoes. But there's always like those technical people out there like me. I agree with you. I don't like those blogs, but those blogs do bring a lot of people in, kind of like the Mr. Money Mustache. I love that blog, even though it's the same thing. He doesn't really get any technical in his blogs.
Right. It's like
So, and
ride
I
bike
love
to
that you
work.
brought up the story of the TSP, because for me, I had a very similar kind of situation, especially in boot camp. The most information we got about the TSP is, hey, you should invest. It's good for you, and put your money in the G fund. You won't ever lose money.
Oh no.
And that was it. And I can't tell you how many recruits in there did it, which is good because they're investing, but then they put their money in the G fund and their money does nothing, and it's just being eaten up by inflation.
Yeah.
And then I talked to other more experienced with more time under their belt about the topic of their TSP, and I would get answers such as, yeah, I remember doing it in boot camp. I've been putting money in it, but I haven't checked it in over 5 years.
Yep.
So, you have people there with their money sitting in the G fund, not doing anything for 5 years, and they miss out on the whole market growth this past,
Yeah.
decade. So it's crazy in that sense, that's like you said, that's as much information as they get in terms of investing in TSP and investing in their future.
Yeah. And it is crazy too. I have a great couple that I'm working with right now, and we actually commissioned on the exact same day together. So we met, right when we commissioned. And so that was in 2010. And so for anyone listening who knows, in 2010, the market had just started recovering. And so when I saw his TSP versus my TSP, it's really sad that there's not someone there to point us in that right direction, because he's that guy that had it in the G fund for the past 13 years. And I mean, look at what the market has done and all that growth. There's something I always tell people, and it's that if you're going to leverage anything in investing, it should be time. Time is like the most important thing, and we can never get that last decade back. And it's historically one of the best decades we've ever had. And so, yeah, that's where I'm passionate about, just helping people know, and yeah, just position themselves accordingly and let the market do its work.
For sure. And then you spoke about, your large savings rate. What was one thing that you implemented that really helped you increase your savings rate?
So this is where I was kind of getting at, like how we were accidentally financially independent, like never had to try. Like I just always saved more. I mean, I lived dirt cheap. When I got married, my wife was actually really good for me in teaching me how to spend money. And so we went to Turks and Caicos on our honeymoon, and that like crushed me when I saw how much that costs, but it was amazing. And then the 2 years later, I got back from a deployment. We went to Greece for like 15 days. That was amazing. But again, it cost a bunch. But I was like, man, these are really good experiences. These are like the highlights of my life. And so it was just through, honestly, I've learned how to spend more and save less, which is ironic, I would say. But before
Yeah.
that, all I was doing is, living in a dirt cheap little 1-bedroom apartment with a really old car and just saving away my money. And so again, there's pros and cons of every approach. I guess the pro is that put a lot of money in the market early, but the con was I was probably missing out on some other opportunities or experiences. So hopefully I'm a little more balanced now.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it definitely comes down to mindset where, a lot of people, the way they think about money is, hey, I need to get what I need first and pay the bills first. But, for me, I think you need to reverse the thought. You need to save and invest first. And then what's left over is what you utilize to pay bills or do whatever else you need. Because then for some people, budgeting, they just can't do it. They can't look at a spreadsheet, or they can't sit down and discipline themselves. But when you reverse the thought, like I said, and you save first how much you want to save, and then see what's left over, then
Yep.
that really opens your eyes of, hey, maybe I don't need to stay in this apartment for $2,000 when I could get something just as nice, $1,000 maybe 30 minutes away.
Yep.
So, I think that's a big thing in terms of kind of changing your mindset on the way you look at your finances.
I do too. And, I've always struggled with the whole $0 budget thing, like the Dave Ramsey approach. Like I used to do that, and I loved building my spreadsheets, but I could never stick to them because I'd get off by a little bit and I would just hate it. Or I'd be like, man, I bought soap and shampoo and bread and peanut butter at Walmart. Like, what am I going to do? These are different categories, and it just would drive me insane. But somewhere along the line, I came across the 50-30-20 budget, and I kind of reversed that to where it's like, try to save about 50%. And then, basically anything else is expenses and whatever else you want to do with it. And so I really just kind of focused even on that. And that's a very simplistic approach, but it honestly works, and it removed all my stress. It was like, I'm hitting all my biggest goals. For us, the most important things are we do our giving to like church and charities. We save and invest aggressively. And then whatever else we want to spend, we don't worry about it. And it's just such a better, lower stress way to handle things, I think.
I agree. And then the other thing I like too is you're kind of doing the three big pillars, as I call it. So you have your small business, which is your financial planning. Then you have your real estate, and then you have your investments. So how about you talk a little bit about each, and then we'll roll into the topic that you wanted to cover today.
Yeah. So what I think of for my financial planning firm is how I can try to help transform people's lives through real estate, entrepreneurship, and then factor investing. Because like you just brought up, as those are three solid pillars. And even within each of those three, you can do so much. So I love the entrepreneurship because I always think of that as being like a small business owner. And so all the tax deductions, like the above the line deductions that you can get to lower your adjusted gross income. And then even if you can get more above the line deductions, then you can actually still take advantage of either itemizing your deductions below the line or taking the standard deduction. So like huge tax savings benefits from just being an entrepreneur. And then obviously real estate. I think most people are probably familiar with the benefits of, tax benefits of real estate on your podcast. And then with the factor investing piece, that just kind of adds in another dimension that can be viewed probably as like an aggressive growth type approach to the portfolio. Not so much tax benefits, though if you are investing in a taxable account, there's ways to maybe harvest gains and losses appropriately if the situation presents itself. But yeah, I just love all of that, honestly. And I will say too, real estate's kind of my new love. Like I've always loved stock investing. And so I was always also that guy that was kind of against real estate, because I think I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It was really good, but sounded a little too slimy maybe. And I'm not going to do that type of stuff. But then finally found Bigger Pockets and found some other good resources. I'm a big fan of Ken McElroy on YouTube. He has great content. And when I started finding those resources, I was like, wow, real estate's amazing. Like you can actually have a little more control, takes more effort for sure. But the tax benefits are amazing. And I think the difference you can make with it is amazing too. So I've really grown to love real estate.
Yeah, and I agree. And the one thing too that people sometimes fail to realize is all three of those pillars support each other and benefit each other in some type of way. So I definitely love those three pillars and using those vehicles and strategies.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
So Daniel, what's the topic that you wanted to cover today?
I think the most important thing, especially for people who are trying to get financially free or financially independent, whatever term they like to use, I think is just to help make sure that as they're doing that, they're creating a life that's, ideal for them and fulfilling. I feel like I see it in a lot of groups. People are talking about making that high salary. And if it's in the military, it can be like, man, I've just got to suck it up to get to 20 years, or I've just got to get, maybe they get promoted at year 18 and they're like, I got to get that third year at that rank and, retire with that on my VA ID or whatever. And so I see that, but then they're miserable in the meantime. And on the other side, I'll see people who are talking about, civilian jobs where they make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, but they hate it. And they're like, if I just do this for 5 more years, then I can quit and be free. And I always just feel like, man, there's got to be that middle ground. And so I feel like I'm most passionate about helping people kind of discover their mission in life. I always view money as like a tool. And so if you have a mission, if you have a vision for your life and you have core values, then man, just use your money as a tool to live those out, and whatever that looks like. And I always respect anyone who works hard because they have to, and I feel like that's how I grew up, with my parents working hard, and they taught us a great, strong work ethic, me and my siblings. And so I appreciate that, because I know they couldn't just, take a sabbatical, you know, but like for those who have this knowledge, for those who have the ability to do this, I really just encourage us to slow down and just do as much good as we can.
Yeah, I agree. And thanks for sharing all that. So for you, in terms of like creating a life that's ideal and fulfilling, how did you yourself go about doing that?
So I would say I've always been in what I'll call helping professions. Before I joined the Army, I was actually an athletic trainer. And so I did athletic training and sports medicine for about 4 years at the Division I level. And I loved it. And it was rewarding, but then I got burned out. And so then I went to physical therapy school in the Army. And, being a physical therapist, all about helping people, or at least it should be. The Army likes to make it about metrics and other things, but it was really good experience, and I loved helping patients. But then I also started, leading the financial readiness classes and stuff, and I just really loved that, and it was so fulfilling, and it was so good. And it was kind of ironic that, like, just wearing the uniform and being able to share information like that was a validation point for a lot of people. Like, he's just like us, we can do this. And it didn't matter. I had a lot of enlisted soldiers that like learned and benefited a ton, and officers alike, even those that outranked me by a long ways, they were so grateful for it, and it just became so fulfilling. And so I think that's where that, well, I'd like to think of it as a heart of a teacher. I don't know if I can say that about myself without being like arrogant or whatever, but I think I have a heart of a teacher, and I love helping people. And so I think over time, just my love for personal finance and helping people kind of create their ideal life, that's what became my biggest thing. And so, yeah, just being able to help people live a life that's more fulfilling, and try to help them if they feel stuck, troubleshoot their situation, and just design things differently, being intentional, that type of stuff.
That's good to hear. And, when you're working with your clients or the people that you're helping out, kind of visualize their ideal life and, find their fulfillment, are there certain things that you implement, such as helping them create a 5, 7, 10-year plan? Is there goals? Do you implement other things such as vision boards?
Yeah, so not quite a vision board yet, but I have an idea I've been working on, kind of more like a brain map almost, of with their core mission, and then their big, hairy, audacious goals, the BHAGs from Jim Collins, not the guy that wrote The Simple Path to Wealth, but the other one. Yeah, so there's some good exercises where we just go through some different questions and then see what they want. And I'm not sure if you're ever heard of the 7 whys. I know a guy named Dean Graziosi kind of popularized it more recently, but it's when someone tells me what they want for a goal, and I ask why that's important to them, and they tell me, and then I say something like, well, what is important about that to you? And then they tell me, and I'm like, well, why is that so important that it's more important than this other thing we were talking about? And then they tell me, and basically you just kind of keep zigzagging back and forth. And eventually they're like, man, I feel like this is important because we grew up poor, or something, something so simple. And it's like, okay, so your why is not to be poor. It wasn't to have $1 million. It was to not feel like you couldn't afford new shoes or whatever it was, and so when you get to that level of depth, it's so good, because all of a sudden, all their goals align with their mission. And when you align people's goals with their mission, it's so much easier to accomplish them. And so, yeah, I love that. And so that takes some time though, but typically we'll try to work through that. We develop what I call a cornerstone mission. So my firm is Cornerstone Financial Planning. And so I love the idea of a cornerstone being, the first stone laid, the straightest angles, perfect 90 degrees, and it's going to set the course for everything else. And so we get that mission down, and then we talk core values, and then we talk about goals. And then when we're talking about goals, I'll question them, like, how does that align with your core values? How does that align with your mission? Is it going the same direction, so it's pulling you forward? Or does that one kind of seems like it's pulling you off to the side, man? You said, You value your family, you value freedom, you value flexibility. You want to create experiences with your family, but you're telling me you got to work 60 hours a week for the next 5 years. Like there's something here that's off. And so like, how can we align your life with your values so that you can still accomplish your financial goals, maybe on a different timeline, but you can also hit all these other values that you value, right now. And so that I feel like is the biggest challenge, but I feel like that's the most rewarding when people get that.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I agree with that as well. In terms of starting your financial planning business, what were some of the things that you ran into that you felt unprepared for, and any lessons learned with that?
Oh, that's a good question. I think the thing that I probably felt most unprepared for was just very specific to financial planning, and that's all the regulatory oversight. And so, in my mind, even after I started the Certified Financial Planner program, I was learning the information and I was thinking, this is great. I can help so many people. And then it got time to register with my state, which is Colorado. And it was just like, oh man, there's like so much more here. And I had to take this other exam called the Series 65 exam. And up until that point, I'd heard of it, but didn't really quite understand what it was about. And it really frustrated me because the Series 65 exam was more about rules and regulations and kind of like how close you can get to the line before you're illegal, or before you're not giving fiduciary advice. And I just felt like it should be the opposite, where we're emphasizing fiduciary advice to the 10th level, rather than talking about how much you can legally charge someone before it becomes illegal, like, so that frustrated me, that surprised me. But as far as actually becoming an entrepreneur and just doing it, it hasn't been that bad. I think a lot of people have told me that, like, oh, that's so scary, but honestly, I think I just kind of committed my mind to it, and it's been easy for me mindset wise. I totally had this identity. I think I'd been becoming this in my mind for the past few years. And so when I finally ETS'd and we flew back from Germany and landed, I was like, okay, now I'm going to become a financial planner. And so the process was really just various steps, but nothing too hard, fortunately. It was more just learning more about the industry and how broad the scope of it is.
Thanks for sharing about that. And, just some quick, facts from the Google machine. They say less than 35 Americans have a financial planner. It's funny because, finances is a big part of life, and a lot of people stress about it, but not a lot of people go out and seek, assistance from people like yourself that are a financial planner. Why do you think that is?
Man, I think there's so much distrust of the financial industry as a whole. And I think, yeah, there's so many reasons. So in general, I'll kind of start with a little historical bit, but after the Great Depression, things started to get regulated finally. So 1940s, they came out with the Investment Advisors Act and a Mutual Fund Act. And so it basically, that became the first financial advice type profession at that point. And so they had some good stuff that still stands today. But the problem is that the way they did things has not changed much in a lot of the industry. And so, if you think about 1949 and, my grandpa needs to buy a mutual fund, which he didn't, but I wish he would have. But he has to call up some guy has to, find a mutual fund for him, sell it to him on a commission, and then hold the shares of it for him. And then, decades later, maybe my grandpa dies and my family inherits it or something, right? The problem is we still have people selling stuff on commission today. And so I won't say whether that's ethically, right or wrong. It's legally right. You can still do that. But I just ask, is it the best? And I think that we've gotten wiser as consumers, with the advent of the internet, even. I think that's why passive index investing's got so popular, because we can finally share the research on it. People finally have free access to all the knowledge on why index investing is probably better than about 90 to 95% of actively managed mutual funds. So we have that knowledge now, but yet there's still a large group of advisors that still operates under the older system. And again, it's still, I think they're helping a lot of people. And I've personally struggled when I've met some advisors who operate under that system at first, And then the more I talk to them, the more I realize they're very passionate also about helping people achieve their goals. So it kind of humbles me because I'm like, their clients probably wouldn't have achieved as many goals as they did had they not had that advisor. But then I also struggle with, but if they had had someone else that was fee only and flat fee, which is my fee model, they might have done a lot better, but we'll never know. And that client will never know. And so, yeah, I think that the mistrust from the American public and advisors just really comes from that sales-based model of selling investments, selling insurance. And so what I am is actually, I separate myself by calling myself a financial planner rather than a financial advisor. So financial planning is more comprehensive, we'll say. So there's about 8 to 10 topic areas I cover with all my clients, whereas a lot of advisors will cover investments and insurance, and they may be licensed to sell both of those. But being a comprehensive financial planner, I'm worried about, your cash flow planning, debt payoff strategies, trying to help them find the most efficient way to do that. And because I don't sell insurance, I can provide a totally independent, objective picture of their risk assessment, And so if I tell them, like, I think you need this much dollars in life insurance, maybe some disability, or maybe an umbrella policy or something like that, they know that that's coming from someone who's not going to make a penny on it, whether they buy it or don't buy it. And so I personally feel better about that if I were a consumer looking for that. And I think that's one of the reasons why I never worked with anyone, ironically. Now going through everything, I'm like, I totally need one. And my wife needs one. If something were to happen to me, I need a financial planner for her to go to, because she does not want to deal with all this stuff that I like. So I think the sales, though, is probably the biggest area of just mistrust and just kind of that gray area, where you can't be totally sure that what they're telling you is in your best interest. So those are the big reasons why I'm an independent firm, and I'm fee only, which means I don't accept any commissions. And then flat fee basically means that when you come to me, you pay for a service, just like if you were going to Walmart and you saw a menu of, 4 different oil changes, you could pick the one that you wanted and you pay that amount and that's what you get. And so that is, to me, that's what resonates more, I think, as being transparent and fair. And so that's why I set my firm up like that.
For sure. Thank you for sharing that. So Daniel, in the topic of do-it-yourself financing versus having someone, assist and help you plan these things out, what's your thought on that?
So I have a bunch of thoughts on this because I DIY'd our finances to get to this point, and we got super lucky in a few ways on the way. So that made a big difference. But I definitely believe that some people are cut out to DIY their investing, their planning, especially in the financial independence space. And especially if you're listening to a podcast like this, you're probably that type of person to really invest in knowledge and kind of learn those best ways. Where I really think it makes sense for even a very successful DIY person to go ahead and get some advice, it just maybe more in the sense of like a financial plan creation, like one time, or maybe an audit of your current financial situation, just because you don't know what you don't know. And I found myself, as I was going through the curriculum for the CFP, there's just a lot of areas that, like, I knew enough from reading other blogs to be dangerous, but I realized very quickly that not all blogs are comprehensive. So they don't actually, cite the IRS or whatever. And when I go read the IRS on, say, like 1031 exchanges, or all the times you can use money from a Roth IRA before age 59 and a half, there's like a lot of options. And so I wouldn't always find that in the blog. So I was like comfortable enough, but not knowing everything. And knowing everything would have made a big difference in some areas. Now, overall, it wouldn't have changed my trajectory, I don't think. But I think that there are areas you can fine tune. And for me, taxes is probably the biggest one. So the most important thing I feel like I offer people is tax planning, because taxes affect your investments, your current income, your cash flows, whether you're making those pre or post-tax retirement contributions, whether you're investing in a taxable account, whether you're putting a certain allocation into real estate. And then, if you want to talk about depreciation or accelerated depreciation, when would a cost segregation study make sense? When would a 1031 make sense? What should you 1031 into? And so really the tax planning piece for me has been my biggest area of growth, I would say, and where I have seen that I think financial planners can add the most value. So one thing I'll find myself telling people who are working with an advisor is if they're not offering tax planning, then they probably should look for someone that's more comprehensive. But I definitely do think some people will do very well DIY. I think others definitely need a planner. And then I think there's a lot of us in the middle that would probably benefit from a tune-up from time to time. But yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And I agree with that as well. Some people are good at doing the heavy legwork and going out and doing the research, and and they can understand it. But there's others out there that going through the tax codes and figuring everything out, that can be overwhelming, especially when you're working a W-2 and you have a family to take care of. So it's always good to build your team, and having a financial planner on your team definitely helps alleviate a lot of the legwork and can help you accelerate your growth and your wealth.
And I think that's the greatest potential that we have, is that kind of acceleration. The way I think about it, I quoted or mentioned the Simple Path to Wealth, and JL Collins has every blog post that's included in that book for free on his website. But I don't want to sit on his website and click through and read blog to blog to blog and have to find it. I'd rather pay $10 and have the book and read it in, one nice, smooth experience. And I think that's where I frustrated myself DIYing it and maybe researching stuff for my blog, because there's so much. And so I think it really just helps to be able to condense it down, simplify it, and present it in hopefully an understandable way for clients. So I feel like that is maybe one good benefit of working with a good financial planner, especially if you're into real estate and you have one that understands real estate.
I agree. And is there anything else that you wanted to cover today before we let the viewers and listeners know how to get a hold of you?
Not that I can really think of. Any thoughts or questions that came up to you, or?
Not for me,
Okay.
But thank you for coming on the show, and it was a pleasure having you. What's the best way for people to get a hold of you? Do you have a website, blog that you want to shout out to?
Yeah, thanks, Erickson. And again, I really appreciate the opportunity to meet you and share this, and I do hope it helps someone. So my website is www.cornerstonefiplanning.com. And so that's just an FI in the middle for financial independence. So cornerstonefiplanning.com. And if you want to check it out, you can see a little bit more about myself and then what we do. And then you can obviously schedule an intro meeting from there if you'd like. And my first 2 meetings are totally free. So if you have any questions at all, you're welcome to ask those. And my second meeting is what I call the Cornerstone Mission Meeting. And that's where I call it my free gift of clarity, because that's where we walk through those goals, the mission, all your values, and try to help you develop that plan to create your ideal life.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing, Daniel. And all that information will be in the notes, and you'll be able to reach out to Daniel in that way. And again, Daniel, thanks for coming on the show and adding some value.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, Erickson.
Thanks for listening to the Yo Club, a military officer investing podcast. You can find us at www.militaryoclub.com or on Facebook searching the Yo Club, Military Officer Investors Network. Have a great day.